The pounding on the door was sharp, deliberate, and oddly familiar, though it had been 14 years since I last heard it. I stood frozen in the foyer of my seaside house, the soft crash of waves outside mocking the storm that suddenly brewed inside me. No one ever came here unannounced. My home was my sanctuary, carefully protected, my safe distance from a past I buried deep. Yet, when I opened the door, I nearly laughed from the cruel irony of life. There they stood, Margaret and Richard Williams, my parents, who had once looked me in the eyes and denied my existence. They were older now, their once polished faces lined with time, their posture no longer dripping with superiority. And yet, their eyes, her piercing, his hollow, brought me back to every wound. I smiled, not warmly, but with the kind of irony forged in fire. "Well," I said, my voice steady though my pulse raced, "look who remembered they had a daughter." Lay. The silence that followed my words hung heavier than the salty ocean air creeping through the doorway. Margaret's lips tightened in disapproval, as if my tone were an inconvenience rather than a justified shield. Richard shifted uncomfortably. His shoulders slouched as though he had rehearsed apologies but couldn't find the courage to speak them. I leaned against the doorframe, enjoying the shift in power, the reversal of a dynamic that once left me crumbling at their feet. Behind them, the afternoon sun glared mercilessly, spotlighting their intrusion like some twisted theater scene. My hand tightened on the doorknob as I waited for their excuse, their explanation, their inevitable demand. Margaret's voice, cold and brittle, finally broke the silence. "Audrey, we need to talk." I almost laughed again, because when had they ever cared about speaking to me? For years, silence had been their language. I invited them in not out of kindness, but to witness them squirm in a world that was mine, built brick by brick without their presence. The marble floors reflected their hesitant footsteps, and the walls adorned with art I had chosen felt like a protective chorus reminding me of freedom. Margaret's sharp eyes scanned the house with thinly veiled envy, her mouth curling into a half-smile that carried more disdain than admiration. Richard, however, seemed to shrink, his gaze fixed on the floor as though it burned his conscience to stand there. I offered no drink, no seat, no comfort. Their discomfort was the only hospitality I intended to provide. I wanted them to feel what I had felt for years, unwanted, unworthy, unseen. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, an old ache pulsed, because no matter how strong you become, the sting of rejection from those meant to love you never truly fades. They didn't come to reconcile, that much I knew. They came because they needed something, and people like them never appeared without a selfish reason. Margaret finally set her eyes on me, chin raised like a queen still pretending to command. "Audrey," she said, drawing out my name as though it were a chore. "We're here because we've fallen on hard times." The words were foreign coming from her, a woman who once sneered at anyone struggling, who measured human worth by wealth and status. I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms, watching her unravel a carefully crafted image. Richard flinched at her honesty, or perhaps at the humiliation of exposing weakness. I could almost taste the irony. After years of being discarded as a burden, I was now their lifeline. The child they erased had risen to become the woman they desperately needed. Before responding, I let the silence build, feeding on their discomfort like a long-awaited meal. My mind flashed back to the day they turned me away, the cold slam of a door, the echo of Margaret's words, "You're not our daughter anymore." 14 years of survival replayed in a single heartbeat, nights spent shivering in tiny apartments, hunger gnawing at my insides, the shame of being unwanted. But I also remembered Clara, my savior, who had given me warmth, dignity, and hope. Without her, I would have vanished into despair. With her, I had built this very house where my parents now stood as beggars. My lips curled into a smile, not of joy, but of justice. "Hard times?" I finally said, my tone deliberately amused. "You mean to tell me the perfect Williams family has fallen apart? How tragic." Richard winced at my words, as though truth itself cut deeper than any insult. He tried to speak, his voice rough and trembling, but Margaret silenced him with a glare sharper than glass. "This isn't about the past," she snapped, as if history could be erased with a dismissive hand. "We're here because you owe us." That word, owe, landed in my chest like a blade twisting old wounds. For a moment, I could barely breathe, the audacity of it choking me. My jaw tightened, my nails pressed into my palms, but I refused to show weakness. Instead, I tilted my head, studying her with the curiosity one reserves for a wild animal pretending to be tame. "Oh," I repeated softly, savoring the venom. "You disowned me. You made it clear I was nothing to you. And now you come to my home, telling me I owe you." The storm was building inside me, but I kept my face calm, as still as the surface of the sea before a hurricane. Margaret's expression flickered for the briefest second, a shadow of unease crossing her perfect facade. Richard finally found his voice, softer than I remembered, broken even. "Audrey," he whispered, his eyes shining with something dangerously close to regret. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes." His words landed differently than hers, carrying less arrogance, more weight. But apologies 14 years too late felt like empty currency. I wanted to scream, to ask him where this regret had been when I was cold, when I was hungry, when I needed a father's arms and a mother's love. Instead, I let the silence suffocate him, let him drown in the words he didn't speak when it mattered. I turned toward the wide windows overlooking the ocean, letting the golden light wash over me like armor. They saw wealth, success, luxury. What they didn't see was the pain carved into every brick, the nights of study by dim lamps, the endless rejection letters, the loneliness that nearly swallowed me whole. This house wasn't just walls and floors. It was survival embodied. "My back to them," I said. "Funny, isn't it? The daughter you erased has more than you ever dreamed. But you know what's even funnier? You think you can just walk back into my life and demand a piece of it." My voice was steady, but inside my chest, my heart was hammering like it might burst. They had no idea the battle I fought to stand here today. When I finally turned back, Margaret's face was pale with restrained fury, Richard's with shame. The power was mine now, though the scars still whispered beneath my skin. I didn't know exactly what they wanted yet, but I knew this. Whatever it was, they would not leave unscathed. I smiled again, the kind of smile that comes when you've waited your whole life for justice. "So," I said, folding my arms as the waves roared louder outside, "tell me, what exactly do you think I owe you? When I was a child, I thought love was something you earned, like grades on a report card or applause at a recital. My parents, Margaret and Richard, never touched me with warmth, never looked at me with the softness I saw in other children's homes. Their lives were polished masks of perfection, every action calculated for appearances, expensive cars, glittering galas, meticulously manicured lawns. I was an accessory in their show, a daughter displayed when convenient, hidden when I didn't meet their impossible standards. I learned quickly that their approval wasn't about me. It was about how I reflected on them. A scuffed shoe, a clumsy word, even a tear out of place was enough to earn icy silence or biting remarks that lingered like bruises. Childhood wasn't laughter or warmth. It was walking a tightrope, terrified of falling. The first time I truly understood their indifference was on my 7th birthday. I sat at the long dining table, candles lit on a perfect cake prepared by a caterer, my dress itchy and stiff. I waited for their smiles, their arms, their acknowledgement that I mattered. Instead, Margaret was too busy criticizing the floral arrangements, and Richard kept taking business calls. The candles burned down, wax spilling onto icing, while my tiny voice whispered wishes into the void. When I finally blew them out alone, a servant clapped softly, pity shadowing her eyes. That moment etched itself into me, the realization that even celebrations in my honor weren't really mine. They were props, illusions, performances for others to applaud while I sat invisible. Nights were the hardest. I remember lying awake in the vast, cold house, the silence pressing down like a suffocating blanket. Hunger gnawed at my stomach more often than it should have, because Margaret obsessed over discipline and often withheld meals if I displeased her. I'd sneak into the kitchen, small hands trembling as I stole crusts of bread, praying no one would catch me. The humiliation of being denied food by my own mother carved deep wounds that no luxury could ever cover. When I looked at her across the dinner table, with her pearls glinting and her perfect posture, I wondered how someone so composed could be so cruel. And Richard, he was there, but never there. His silence was worse than her sharp words. He let it happen, his gaze sliding away as if I weren't even his child. I spent years longing for affection, for any sign that I belonged. I remember watching other children with their parents at school events, the hugs, the cheers, the simple pride of being claimed. My parents came sometimes, but only when it boosted their image. Margaret would criticize my hair, my posture, my every word, then smile wide for photographs that showed us as a happy family. The moment the cameras were gone, her hands tightened on my shoulder, nails digging into my skin as she hissed corrections into my ear. I learned to stop asking for hugs, for attention, for bedtime stories. I stopped expecting love and began to hope only for tolerance. To survive, I told myself, if I work harder, if I am perfect enough, maybe they will see me. But they never did. The moment they disowned me is etched into my bones, a wound that will never fully heal. I was 15, trembling on the doorstep after yet another argument sparked by nothing. Margaret accusing me of being a burden, Richard too weak to contradict her. She looked me dead in the eye, her words sharp as glass. "You're not our daughter anymore." Then came the slam of the door, the sound of locks clicking into place. That sound has haunted me in nightmares, the brutal punctuation of rejection. I stood outside in the cold, clutching a small bag of clothes, feeling the world collapse under my feet. In that moment, the fantasy that they might one day love me shattered completely. I realized I had been orphaned, not by death, but by choice. I wandered for days, moving between couches of school friends, their parents casting me sympathetic looks that burned with shame. I lied to teachers, hid my hunger, pretended I was fine while inside I was hollow. I was too proud to beg, too wounded to ask for help beyond the bare minimum. Each night, I cried quietly into thin pillows, muffling the sound so no one would know. The loneliness was unbearable, heavier than the hunger. More than food or shelter, I craved what I would never have, the unconditional love of the people who brought me into this world. Their absence was a scar deeper than poverty, a constant reminder that I was not enough, never enough, for them to choose me. There was one winter night I'll never forget. The snow outside was thick, and I sat in a drafty room lent by a kind neighbor, my stomach aching with emptiness. I pressed my forehead to the frosted window and whispered into the glass, "Why wasn't I enough?" My reflection looked back at me with hollow eyes, a girl who already felt older than her years. That night, I swore to myself, if I ever survived, if I ever made something of my life, it would not be because of them. It would be in spite of them. I would never again beg for scraps of their affection. I would build a future so solid, so untouchable, that their rejection could never destroy me. That vow kept me alive when everything else was stripped away. Yet, despite the strength I found in survival, the little girl inside me never fully vanished. Even now, standing in my seaside home, I still hear her, lonely, broken, whispering questions into the dark. It is a cruel truth. No matter how successful you become, no matter how fiercely you fight, the longing for parental love never disappears entirely. It lingers like a phantom, appearing when you least expect it, reminding you of what was stolen. But that longing no longer controls me. Their rejection made me strong, made me resilient, but it also hardened me. So when I looked into their faces after 14 years, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever they came here to demand, they would never again hold power over me. When I think of survival, I don't think of grit or luck. I think of Clara Evans. She was the neighbor who opened her door when no one else would, the one who looked past the shame and ragged clothes to see a child who desperately needed a place to belong. I remember the first night she took me in, her home warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon tea, the fire crackling in the hearth. She didn't ask me to explain myself right away. She simply handed me a blanket, a bowl of stew, and said, "Eat, sweetheart. We'll talk later." That kindness, so simple yet so profound, broke something in me. I cried into that bowl of stew, my tears salty against the broth, because it was the first time in years someone cared if I was fed. Clara wasn't rich or glamorous. She didn't have the polished perfection my parents obsessed over, nor did she care for such things. Her little cottage leaned slightly to one side. Her furniture was worn but cozy, and her garden grew wild with herbs and flowers that tumbled into each other. But it was in that imperfection that I felt safe. She never treated me like a burden, never made me feel like I was a blemish on her life. Instead, she made room for me, both in her home and in her heart. Each time she looked at me, it wasn't with criticism or calculation. It was with genuine warmth. For the first time, I was not invisible. I was seen. She gave me discipline too, but it was never cruel. If I came home late, she made me sit with her at the kitchen table and talk about responsibility, her voice firm but kind. If I lashed out in anger, she reminded me to breathe, to choose words over silence, to not let pain dictate my life. Clara believed in balance, love with boundaries, freedom with accountability. Her rules were not chains, but scaffolding that helped me rebuild a sense of order. With her, I learned that structure could come from care, not control. When she hugged me after a scolding, whispering, "You're better than what they made you believe," I started to believe her. I still remember the first Christmas I spent with her. We couldn't afford fancy gifts, but she baked gingerbread cookies and knitted me a scarf, her hands working late into the night by the fire. On Christmas morning, she handed it to me, apologizing that it wasn't much. I wrapped it around my neck, feeling the scratchy wool, and I burst into tears. "It's perfect," I whispered, because it was the first gift given to me not for show, not for appearances, but out of pure love. That scarf, though worn and frayed now, is still folded neatly in my drawer. It is my reminder that love doesn't come wrapped in gold paper. It comes in the quiet devotion of someone who chooses you, day after day. Clara also encouraged me to pursue education. While my parents dismissed my dreams as frivolous, she scraped together money for books, tutored me in subjects she knew, and celebrated every report card as if it were a medal of honor. "Knowledge is your ticket out, Audrey," she'd say, tapping the side of my head gently. "They can take everything else from you, but not what's in here." Her faith in me was unshakable, and slowly it became the foundation of my own belief in myself. Each time I doubted my worth, Clara's voice echoed louder than the cruel words of Margaret and Richard. She taught me that my past didn't define me, my choices did. But Clara wasn't just a teacher, she was a healer. On nights when old wounds reopened, when memories clawed at me like shadows, she'd sit by my bed, reading softly until my breathing steadied. She sang lullabies even though my teenage pride made me roll my eyes. She brushed my hair when I was too tired to lift my arms. All those little acts, which my parents had deemed unimportant, stitched together a broken heart. She wasn't obligated to love me, but she did. That was the greatest lesson of all, that love isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who stays, who refuses to let you fall through the cracks. Of course, not every day was easy. There were moments when I resented her rules, when the bitterness from my parents' rejection made me lash out. I remember shouting once, "You're not my mother!" The silence that followed cut me deeper than my own words. Clara didn't shout back. She just looked at me with a sadness that pierced me, then quietly said, "I know, but that doesn't mean I don't love you like one." Shame flooded me, and I sobbed into her arms until I fell asleep. That moment taught me the weight of words, the fragility of love, and the incredible grace Clara had in never turning her back on me. By the time I was old enough to leave for university, Clara had become more than just a neighbor who rescued a lost girl. She was my anchor. Her love was the compass that guided me, her wisdom, the fuel that drove me forward. As I boarded the bus that would take me to the first chapter of my independence, she stood on the sidewalk, scarf fluttering in the wind, waving until I disappeared from sight. My heart ached, but it also burned with determination. I would not waste the chance she had given me. I would become someone she could be proud of, someone who would prove that her love had saved a life, and I did. Every success I've earned since then, every wall I've climbed, has Clara's fingerprints on it, and that is why, years later, when Margaret and Richard reappeared at my door with greed in their eyes, my heart did not waver. They had abandoned me, erased me, denied me. Clara had done the opposite. She had claimed me, raised me, and shown me my worth. My parents were nothing more than strangers with shared DNA, while Clara was the true mother I had always needed. They could sneer, they could demand, they could try to rewrite the past, but they could never erase the truth. I am Audrey Evans, daughter of Clara Evans by love, if not by blood, and that identity is stronger than anything they could ever try to take from me. When I left Clara's home for university, I carried nothing but a small suitcase, a worn scarf, and a heart that was equal parts hope and fear. Poverty clung to me like a second skin. I had no safety net, no family wealth, no one but myself to fall back on. Yet Clara's voice echoed in my head with every step. "Knowledge is your ticket out, Audrey." I worked mornings at a cafe, afternoons in the library, and nights scrubbing floors at the university's science building. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but with every aching muscle and every dollar saved, I reminded myself this was the price of freedom. I was no longer the discarded daughter of Richard and Margaret. I was building something of my own. There were nights when exhaustion swallowed me whole, I would collapse onto my thin dorm mattress, still wearing my work uniform, tears soaking the pillow as I wondered if I could keep going. My classmates attended parties, traveled during holidays, or drove cars I could never dream of affording. I felt invisible among them, a shadow in their world of privilege. Yet I refused to let envy break me. Instead, I turned it into fuel. Every time I scrubbed a toilet or served a cappuccino to someone who barely glanced at me, I whispered a silent promise. One day they will see me. One day I will not be defined by what I lack, but by what I've built with my own hands. Scholarships became my lifeline. I applied for every one I could find, pouring my story into essays late into the night. I wrote about hunger, about rejection, about Clara's unwavering love, and about the fire that kept me alive. And the world listened. Letters arrived in my mailbox with words like "Congratulations," and "We are honored to support your journey." Each envelope felt like a victory not just for me, but for Clara too. I taped the letters above my bed, a growing constellation of proof that I was not worthless, that I deserved to be here. They weren't just scholarships. They were lifelines, lifeboats pulling me out of the drowning waters of despair. The day I moved into my first apartment felt like crossing a finish line. It wasn't grand, just a cramped one-bedroom with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. Mine to lock, mine to fill, mine to claim as a space no one could take away. I furnished it with secondhand finds from thrift shops, a crooked table, mismatched chairs, curtains that didn't quite cover the windows. Yet when I laid down on that sagging mattress, I smiled, because I was no longer a guest in someone else's story. This was the first brick in the foundation of my independence. I invited Clara over for dinner, cooking pasta on my tiny stove, and when she stepped inside, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I knew you'd get here." But building a life was not just about surviving, it was about learning to heal. The scars of rejection lingered, whispering lies when I stood in front of mirrors or faced setbacks. There were moments I almost believed them, moments when Margaret's cold voice resurfaced in my mind, telling me I'd never be enough. But Clara's counterpoint was always stronger. "You are worth loving, Audrey." Therapy, journaling, and friendships built along the way slowly rewrote the narrative inside me. Each time I achieved a goal, a published paper, a promotion, a landlord who trusted me with a lease, I silenced the ghosts a little more. Success was not just external, it was an internal battle I fought daily, and little by little, I was winning. Years later, when I finally stood at the shore of the ocean, staring at the house that would become mine, I felt the culmination of every sacrifice. It was a seaside home with wide windows, salt in the air, and enough space for laughter to echo through the rooms. Signing the deed felt surreal. Me, the girl who once went hungry, who slept under a roof of indifference, was now the owner of a home that looked like it belonged in glossy magazines. I thought of Clara, of her garden, of her scarf still folded in my drawer, and I whispered, "We did it." Because though the money came from my work, the strength had always been hers, passed down through every act of love. But with success came a strange silence. There were no parents to call, no proud voices on the other end of the line saying, "That's our daughter." Instead, there was only the hum of the ocean and the ache of what should have been. For a while, I let loneliness creep in, wondering if triumph meant anything without someone to share it with. Yet in time, I realized I wasn't alone at all. Clara's presence lived in every choice I made, every kindness I extended, every risk I took. My chosen family mattered more than the one that had abandoned me. That truth became my armor against the emptiness they left behind. I built a career, friendships, a reputation. I traveled to places I once only saw in books, stood on stages to speak about resilience, mentored students who reminded me of my younger self. And yet, despite everything I had accomplished, there was always a shadow lurking at the edges. Richard and Margaret. They had erased me from their lives, denied me as their daughter, and I had spent years convincing myself I no longer cared. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. 14 years after slamming the door on me, they would return, this time to the very doorstep of the seaside house I had fought so hard to build. And when they did, I opened the door with a smile that was anything but welcoming. The knock on my door that morning carried a weight I felt in my chest before I even turned the handle. When I opened it, the sight before me was almost surreal. Margaret, pristine as ever in her carefully pressed blazer, though the edges of her perfection were fraying, wrinkles etched deeper, lips pursed too tightly. as if holding the world at bay. Richard stood behind her, thinner than I remembered. His once commanding presence dimmed into a hunched shadow. For a moment, I thought perhaps time had softened them, that age had finally taught humility. But then Margaret's eyes scanned the house behind me, widening with a greedy gleam that made the truth unmistakable. They hadn't come for me. They had come for what I owned. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, as though they had every right. Margaret's heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floors, each step sounding like an accusation, like a claim of ownership over the space I had fought to build. Richard lingered near the door, his silence a shield, though his gaze drifted across the walls adorned with my achievements and photographs that did not include them. Margaret wasted no time in speaking. "So," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "it seems you've done well for yourself." The pause before well was deliberate, slicing like a knife, a reminder that no matter what I achieved, in her eyes, it could never erase the daughter she disowned. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of offering hospitality. "Why are you here?" I asked, my tone calm but carrying the bite of steel. She smiled, though it was more of a smirk, as if my question were naive. "We've fallen on difficult times," she said, waving her hand in a dismissive arc, as though financial ruin were nothing more than an inconvenient breeze. "Your father made some poor investments and, well, it seems only fair that you help us. After all, family takes care of family." I almost laughed at the audacity of it, the sudden resurrection of kinship when money was at stake. Richard cleared his throat, a sound rough and hesitant, but Margaret cut him off before he could speak. "We know you have money," she continued, her voice growing harder. "Look at this house, this display of wealth. You can't possibly need it all. Think of us, Audrey. After all we did for you." The words stung, not because they were true, but because of how boldly she twisted reality. After all we did for you, what had they done but starve me of love, cast me out when I needed them most, leave me to survive on the scraps of Clara's kindness? My chest burned with a fury that pressed against my ribs, but I held it in, refusing to give her the spectacle she wanted. Instead, I studied Richard. His eyes darted to the floor, unable to meet mine, his guilt almost palpable in the silence he maintained. There was no defense in him, no protest to Margaret's demands, only the hollow shell of a man who had long surrendered his voice to hers. I wondered if he had come because he wanted to, or because Margaret had dragged him here like a puppet on strings. Yet his silence condemned him as much as her arrogance. To stand by, to watch my childhood unravel into loneliness and hunger, and to say nothing, that was his legacy. Now, he looked as though the weight of it was finally crushing him, though far too late. Margaret's words grew sharper, more entitled with every breath. "You owe us, Audrey. Do you hear me? You owe us. Without us, you wouldn't even exist. It's time you showed some gratitude." Her voice echoed in the room, each syllable thick with venom. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms, but my expression remained steady. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Inside, though, my rage was a quiet fire, steady and dangerous. Gratitude? The only gratitude I felt was for Clara, for the woman who had picked up the pieces Margaret and Richard left shattered. I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my voice. "Gratitude?" I repeated, almost whispering, but with an edge that made her pause. "You want me to thank you? For abandoning me? For denying me as your daughter? For leaving me to starve while you polished your perfect reputation?" The silence that followed was thick, stretching taut between us. Margaret blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time, but only for a heartbeat before it returned, brittle and cold. "You wouldn't understand," she snapped, her arrogance cracking into defensiveness. "We did what we had to do." My chest tightened with the weight of unspoken memories, each one a dagger she would never acknowledge. Richard finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse, as if dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "Margaret, enough." The words barely filled the space, fragile against her sharpness, but they lingered. His eyes met mine then, briefly, and in them I saw a flicker of something, regret, shame, perhaps even sorrow, but it was drowned by years of silence, too little and far too late. Margaret shot him a look of pure disdain before turning back to me, her mouth opening to demand once more. And in that moment, standing in the home they thought they could lay claim to, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the child they once discarded. I was the woman who had survived in spite of them, and I would make sure they understood that truth. The silence after Richard's faint protest seemed to stretch on forever, thick enough to suffocate me. I stood there, staring at the two people who had given me life, yet denied me everything that life should have meant. My throat tightened, but not with fear. It was anger. It was sorrow. It was that endless question I had carried since childhood. Why wasn't I enough? Margaret was the first to break the quiet, her words sharp and unyielding. You think you suffered, Audrey? Do you have any idea what it meant for us? Trying to maintain appearances while you constantly embarrassed us? Your stubbornness, your defiance. It left us no choice. Her tone was cold, clinical, as if she were recounting an unfortunate business decision, rather than the destruction of her own child's soul. I laughed then, though the sound carried no joy. It was a hollow, bitter laugh that echoed through the seaside house like broken glass. Appearances? I spat the word back at her. I went to bed hungry while you hosted dinner parties. I wore torn shoes to school while you flaunted jewelry. I stood outside in the rain, waiting for a door you refused to open. But yes, Margaret, at least your reputation remained spotless. My voice cracked on the last word, betraying the part of me that still bled, still longed for the warmth I had begged for in vain. I hated myself for it, for still caring at all. Yet the child inside me screamed to be acknowledged, to be loved even now. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floorboards as though they might open up and swallow him whole. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, trembling with an emotion I had rarely heard from him. I wanted to stop it, he whispered. I wanted to fight for you, Audrey. But your mother, he faltered, glancing at Margaret with the fear of a man who had been silenced for decades. She was relentless. I thought it was best. I thought I was powerless. His words hung in the air, pathetic and broken, and my stomach twisted at the cowardice of it. Powerless? He had been an adult, a father, a supposed protector, and yet he had let me starve, let me believe I was unworthy of even his quiet defense. I felt fury rising like a tide, threatening to drown me, but beneath it was something even worse, that dangerous flicker of yearning. His regret, pitiful as it was, tugged at the deepest, most wounded part of me, a part that whispered, if he's sorry, maybe he loved you all along. But another voice, louder, sharper, answered immediately. Love does not abandon you. Love does not silence itself while you cry out for help. I looked at him, at the man who had once lifted me as a toddler onto his shoulders, who had laughed with me before Margaret's icy influence suffocated our home. For a fleeting moment, I saw that man again, trapped in chains of his own making, and still, I could not forgive. Margaret's lip curled in disdain. Stop this pathetic act, Richard. You're not powerless. You're weak. And Audrey, don't fool yourself into thinking this is about love or regret. It's about survival. You need money, and you have it. Whether you like it or not, you wouldn't be here without us. You owe us. Her words cut sharper than knives. Her voice raised, ringing through the house like a judgment. But instead of breaking me, it only fueled the fire inside. For so long, I had been silenced by her, crushed beneath her expectations. Now, I realized the truth. Her voice no longer had power unless I gave it to her. I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides, my voice trembling with contained rage. No, Margaret, I owe you nothing. You denied me food, denied me love, denied me the simple dignity of being your daughter. Clara Evans, my neighbor, is the reason I'm alive. She fed me, clothed me, and reminded me that I mattered when you discarded me like trash. If I owe gratitude to anyone, it is to her, not you. My chest rose and fell with the weight of the words, the truth I had waited years to speak. Margaret's face paled, not from shame, but from outrage at being challenged. Her hands tightened into fists, her composure cracking at the edges. Richard tried again, his voice trembling. Audrey, I know nothing can undo the past, but I swear to you, I always loved you, even when I failed you. I regret every moment I let her. He stopped, swallowed hard, and the tears shimmering in his eyes almost broke me. Almost. I wanted to believe him, to let those words soothe the aching wound in my chest. But love that hides, love that allows cruelty to prevail, is not love at all. It is cowardice dressed in silence. Then why didn't you fight? I whispered, my voice trembling with years of suppressed pain. His face crumpled, and he had no answer. None that could ever matter. Margaret's patience snapped. "Enough of this," she barked, her voice sharp as glass. "You will help us, Audrey, whether you like it or not. You have everything because we made sacrifices. You wouldn't have this life if not for us. So stop your self-righteous pity and give us what we came for." Her words slammed into me like waves against a cliff. Relentless, demanding, entitled. But for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink back. I stood tall, shoulders squared, heart pounding, and realized this confrontation was more than about money. It was about reclaiming myself, about showing them that I was no longer the frightened, abandoned child they once destroyed. I looked at them both, my chest heaving, tears burning in my eyes, and felt the truth crystallize inside me. This was the moment I had dreaded and longed for all at once. The reckoning. Margaret's icy cruelty, Richard's hollow regret, my own desperate yearning for love that would never come. It all collided within me like a storm. I wanted to scream, to break something, to collapse into Clara's arms as I once had. Instead, I stood there, strong but trembling, knowing that the next words I spoke would define everything. My voice was low but unyielding as I said, "You abandoned me once, but you will never control me again." The weight of their words lingered in the air like poison, seeping into my chest, threatening to undo me. Margaret stood there, her eyes sharp, unyielding, while Richard's gaze wavered with guilt he could never erase. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the force of everything I had buried for so long. It was in that moment that I remembered the envelope locked away in my desk drawer upstairs, the one written in Clara's careful handwriting, given to me in her will. She had told me in her final days that I would know when the time was right to read it aloud. I realized with a chill that this was that time. My heart pounded as I left them in the living room, climbed the stairs, and retrieved the letter, my fingers brushing over the fragile paper that held her voice, her love, her truth. When I returned, Margaret's arms were crossed, impatience carved into her features, while Richard shifted uneasily on the couch. I held up the letter like a shield, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Before I give you any answer," I said, "there's something you need to hear, something Clara wanted me to know, and perhaps something you need to be reminded of." Margaret rolled her eyes dramatically, muttering, "More melodrama," but her mask faltered when I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The sound of crackling parchment filled the silence, and for once, they both waited. The words written on that page weren't just ink. They were Clara's soul poured onto paper, and they had the power to shatter everything. "My dearest Audrey," I began, my voice trembling as I read, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side, but I am watching over you. I need you to understand something you were too young to see when you came to me. The day your parents abandoned you was not simply a failure of love. It was planned. Margaret never wanted you, not because you weren't extraordinary, but because you were too real, too human. You didn't fit her image of perfection, and in her vanity, she believed discarding you would protect her reputation. Richard may have loved you in silence, but silence is not love, and it did not save you. Do not let their shadows dictate your worth. You were always more than enough." My throat tightened, and my vision blurred. But I forced myself to continue. For her. For me. The room went still. Margaret's face hardened, but a flash of unease flickered in her eyes before she masked it with a scoff. Richard's shoulders slumped, as if Clara's words had stripped away the last defenses he clung to. I read on, my voice steadier now, as if Clara's presence filled me with strength. "Audrey, I want you to know why I fought for you. You reminded me of myself when I was young, forgotten, unloved by those who should have cared most. I saw your spirit, fragile but unbroken, and I vowed never to let that light be extinguished. You became my daughter, in every way that mattered. My proudest moments were watching you rise from their rejection, stronger than they ever imagined. Do not give them the power to undo what you have built. Remember, family is not blood. It is love, chosen and proven." As the words left my mouth, I felt a surge of emotions I could barely contain. Clara had written this not only to reveal their cruelty, but to anchor me when I needed it most. She had known there would come a day when my parents would resurface, not to claim me, but to claim what was never theirs. She had known they would twist guilt and shame into weapons, and she had given me the armor to fight back. Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of remembering that even in death, Clara was still protecting me. Margaret snapped suddenly, her voice sharp as broken glass. "This is absurd. A bitter old woman's lies scribbled on paper. She poisoned you against us, Audrey, don't you see? She wanted to keep you for herself, to make you turn on your family." Her words were desperate now, tinged with fear beneath the venom. Richard, however, did not echo her. He sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking as silent tears fell. For once, he had no excuses, no defenses, only the crushing weight of truth pressing down on him. His silence screamed louder than Margaret's protests. I lowered the letter slowly, folding it back with reverence as if it were a sacred artifact. My gaze locked on Margaret's, unflinching, unwavering. "You call Clara bitter, but she was the only one who fed me when I starved. The only one who loved me when you cast me aside. She didn't poison me. She saved me. And you, Margaret, you revealed yourself in her words. You never wanted me, not because I was unworthy, but because you feared the mirror I held up to your imperfection. And Richard," I turned to him, softer but resolute, "you loved me in silence, but silence is complicity. Clara was right. You failed me." The letter still trembled in my hands, but its message rooted me like stone. For the first time, I didn't feel like a broken child facing her tormentors. I felt like the woman Clara had raised me to be. I could see Margaret's fury, Richard's guilt, and for once, I did not shrink back. Clara's voice echoed in my heart, reminding me, "You were always more than enough." I inhaled deeply, my chest steady, my path clear. This was no longer about money, or appearances, or even revenge. This was about breaking the final chain that bound me to them. And I knew, as I folded Clara's letter close to my chest, that I was ready for whatever came next. Margaret's face twisted with rage, her lips curling into a sneer that dripped venom. "That woman was nothing but a meddling hag," she spat, her voice rising with each word. "She filled your head with lies, Audrey. Made you believe you were something special when in reality, you were just a burden no one wanted. And don't flatter yourself with this house or your little accomplishments. This is nothing but luck, a stroke of fortune you didn't earn." Her words struck like knives, each syllable meant to cut me down, to reduce me back to that frightened child she had disowned. I felt the air thicken, my chest tighten, and the final remnants of restraint slipping from my grasp. It was not just an insult to me, but to Clara, the woman who had given everything to heal the wounds my parents had inflicted. Richard raised a hand as if to quiet her, but Margaret shoved his arm away with a sharp glare. "Don't you dare defend her, Richard. She's sitting here parading this wealth as if it's some testament to her strength, when we both know without Clara's handouts she'd be nothing. She's a charity case dressed in designer clothes." My nails dug into my palms as her words echoed against the walls of my home. I had endured years of silence, nights of hunger, rejection so raw it scarred my soul. But this blatant erasure of my fight, my survival, ignited a fury so deep it left no room for fear. For the first time, I saw Margaret not as a mother, not even as a human being, but as a cruel mirror of everything I had conquered. I rose slowly from my chair, the letter still clutched against my chest like a talisman. My voice came out low, steady, but it carried the weight of all the years I had been silenced. "Luck?" I repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Do you call working 3 jobs while finishing school luck? Do you call sleeping on cold floors because I couldn't afford heat luck? Do you call eating stale bread because it was all I had luck? You see marble floors and a seaside view, Margaret, but you don't see the blood, the sweat, the nights I wanted to give up but didn't. You don't see Clara at my side, reminding me that I was worth fighting for when you made sure I believed I wasn't. That's not luck, that's survival. And survival is stronger than any privilege you've ever known." Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or recognition she dared not admit. Richard looked at me, shame deep in his face, his lips trembling as if he wanted to speak, but no sound escaped. I didn't let the silence linger long. I stepped closer, the power in my voice rising with each word. "You disowned me because I threatened your image, because I was too real, too raw for your polished world. You chose appearances over love, reputation over blood. And Clara? She didn't just take me in. She made me her daughter in every way that mattered. She gave me discipline when I needed it, affection when I starved for it, and faith when I had none left. She was more of a mother in one day than you have been in your entire life." Margaret's hands shook now, but her pride wouldn't let her fold. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she hissed, parading yourself as though your pitiful story makes you noble. You wouldn't last a day without the money Clara left you. Deep down, you're still the unwanted child we left behind. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips, sharp and unrestrained. You're right about one thing, I said coldly. I am the child you left behind, but I didn't stay there, Margaret. I grew. I clawed my way out of the pit you threw me into, and I built a life so solid that even your venom can't touch it. You disowned me, and I finally understand. I never needed you. Not then, not now, not ever. The room vibrated with the force of my words, and Margaret, for the first time, faltered. Her eyes darted around as if searching for a weapon to strike me with, but every insult she had rehearsed, every excuse she had clung to, lay in ashes at her feet. Richard spoke then, his voice broken. Audrey, she's wrong. You are extraordinary. I should have defended you, I should have... His words trailed off, drowned in his own failure. For a brief moment, I almost felt the ache of his regret tugging at me, but Clara's letter still burned in my hands, reminding me that silence and regret had never fed me, never loved me. Regret without change was useless. I straightened my shoulders and let my final decision hang heavy in the air. You came here for money, I said, locking eyes with Margaret. You'll get nothing. Not 1 cent, not 1 ounce of what I bled for. This house, this life, it is mine. Clara gave me love, and with that love, I built everything you see here. You forfeited your claim to me the day you shut the door in my face. So take your greed, your arrogance, your ghosts of regret, and leave. Because in this house, you have no power. You never will again. My words echoed through the room like a final verdict, and in that instant, the power they once held over me disintegrated completely. Margaret stumbled back, her face pale with fury she could no longer control, while Richard sat frozen, guilt consuming him. I stood firm, my chest rising and falling with the release of years of pain, shame, and longing finally burned away. For so long I had feared this confrontation, but now, standing in the ruins of their pride, I felt nothing but clarity. Clara had been right. Family wasn't blood. It was love, and love had given me the strength to cut their chains. As the silence stretched, I realized this was the moment I had waited for all my life. I was no longer the abandoned girl they had cast aside. I was Audrey, daughter of Clara Evans, survivor, fighter, and woman of my own making. Margaret's face contorted in anger, her nostrils flaring as she stomped toward the door. Richard lingered, hands trembling at his sides, his eyes fixed on the floor. I thought it was over, that the storm had finally passed, that I could breathe without the weight of their demands crushing me. But then Richard's voice, weak and raw, shattered the fragile calm. Audrey, there's something you've never been told, he whispered, each word carrying the tremor of years of buried guilt. I froze, the air in the room suddenly thick, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. My pulse jumped, dread twisting in my stomach. What is it? I demanded, my voice sharp despite the fear rising like tidewater. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. It's about your sister. The word hit me like ice. Sister? My mind spun, my chest tightening as 1,000 memories of absence collided with the revelation. I had been told I was an only child, left to navigate the world alone, abandoned by those who were supposed to love me. My hands clenched at my sides as I stepped closer to him. What are you saying? My voice was trembling now, fragile yet demanding. Richard looked up, his face etched with decades of shame. She was sick, Audrey. Very sick. And your mother insisted we hide it, that no one could know. She wanted the world to see a perfect family. And your sister paid the price. The room seemed to tilt, the floor beneath me shaking as if the earth itself recoiled from the weight of his confession. I stumbled, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself, my mind struggling to reconcile the image of my mother, the woman who had abandoned me, with the horror he had just revealed. You mean she died because of them? I whispered, barely able to breathe. Richard nodded, shame and grief mingling in his expression. Yes, I didn't want you to know. Margaret, she couldn't bear the shame, and I was too weak to stop it. I was powerless, and I failed her. I failed both of you. His words fell like stones into my chest, heavy, suffocating, and I felt the long years of abandonment fracture further. Anger surged in me, boiling over like lava finally unleashed. I wanted to scream, to strike, to make the cruelty palpable for Margaret, for Richard, for the universe that had allowed this to happen. All these years, all the hunger, all the nights alone, all the rejection, I shouted, tears streaming down my face. And it was all part of your lies? You hid a dying child to maintain appearances, and I had to pay for it too? Margaret turned, her face a mask of indignation and fury, but Richard looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't know what to do, he stammered, but his excuses fell flat against the magnitude of their deception. I sank into a chair, my hands shaking as the weight of this revelation crushed me. My sister had existed, lived in this world, and died because appearances mattered more than life itself. How many times had I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was unwanted? How many nights had I wished for even a fragment of care that had been deliberately denied? And all the while, my parents had chosen the image over their children, hiding one death while abandoning another. My grief twisted into rage, into disbelief, into an aching void that no words could fill. Richard knelt in front of me, hands clasped, eyes pleading. Audrey, I know I can't undo this. I can't bring her back. I can't give you what you needed, but you deserve to know. You deserve the truth. I looked at him, the man who had once been complicit, and felt a flicker of pity, fleeting and fragile, before it was consumed by the larger storm inside me. The truth? I asked bitterly, my voice low, seething. The truth is that you abandoned me. The truth is that my life was never yours to control, and the truth is that you will never be able to take this pain back. Margaret's face turned red, her hands trembling with fury as she tried to interject, to deflect, to reclaim her control. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. I did what I had to do. Her voice cracked, revealing the brittle fragility beneath her pride. I looked at her, really looked, and the woman I had once longed to please now seemed small, broken, and pitiful, incapable of love or courage. What you did, I said slowly, deliberately, was murder in all but name. You killed her with your silence. You killed me with your abandonment. And now, nothing you say or do can fix it. The house felt suffocating, charged with grief, anger, and the haunting echoes of a past neither of them could escape. I stood, my body trembling, but my voice strong. You wanted me to obey, to grovel, to feel small, I continued, eyes blazing. Well, I've survived, I've thrived, and I have something neither of you will ever have, clarity and the love of the only family that mattered. Clara loved me. Clara protected me. Clara made me who I am, and no amount of your greed, shame, or lies can take that from me. Richard bowed his head, defeated, while Margaret's face twisted in disbelief and fury, realizing that the child she had scorned had grown into a force she could not touch. As they finally left, the weight of their absence hung heavy in the air. But unlike before, I did not feel abandoned. I felt liberated. The truth had been revealed, and with it came a profound, if painful, freedom. I walked to the window of my seaside home, the ocean stretching endlessly before me, a reminder that life moves forward, that the past, no matter how dark, cannot define the entirety of the present. And for the first time, I felt complete, whole, in a way I had never allowed myself to feel. The lies, the abandonment, the hidden death, they had shaped me, but they did not own me. I was my own, and my life was mine to live. The doorbell had rung for the last time, echoing through the airy halls of my seaside house like a thunderclap I was finally ready to withstand. I had watched my parents' faces contort in a mix of frustration, disbelief, and the faintest flicker of regret as they packed themselves into their car, each movement hesitant as though they sensed the finality of this moment. I stood in the foyer, my hands gripping the edges of the doorframe, my chest tight with both grief and liberation. The wind from the open balcony tousled my hair, carrying the briny scent of the ocean that had become my sanctuary. For 15 years, I had imagined this confrontation in countless ways. Anger, retribution, tears. But now that it had unfolded, I realized the most powerful act was not vengeance, but choosing peace. I inhaled deeply, feeling Clara's presence, her unwavering love enfolding me even after all these years. She had always known that freedom was possible, that survival alone wasn't enough. One had to claim life with both hands, unapologetically. Today, I did exactly that. I moved toward the large bay window, where the sunlight danced on the waves, the water glinting like shattered diamonds stitched together by the horizon. In the distance, gulls called to one another, their cries raw and unpolished, untamed, a freedom I felt pulsing within me. My fingers traced the smooth surface of the glass, and for the first time, I allowed the enormity of my journey to settle in my bones. From the girl who had begged for scraps of love, who had endured humiliation and abandonment, I had become a woman who commanded her own existence. Each scar, each tear, each sleepless night had carved pathways to resilience I never thought possible. And now, my parents' silhouettes receding in the driveway were symbols, not of rejection, but of the chains I had finally shattered. I smiled, ironic and serene, knowing that their absence no longer hurt. It was liberation incarnate. Clara's letter, still pinned above my writing desk, caught my eye. The words she had penned years ago, reminding me that I was enough, that I was loved, now resonated with a clarity I could never have appreciated as a child. "You are worthy of a family that sees you, not one that hides you in shame," she had written. My heart swelled as I read her words aloud, letting each syllable reverberate in the room. I realized that she had never truly left me. Her love had been the foundation of my life, a lighthouse guiding me through the darkest nights. Everything my parents had tried to withhold, the warmth, the encouragement, the recognition of my humanity, Clara had given in abundance. She had taught me the only love that mattered was not conditional, not performative, not bound by social approval. She had shown me that self-worth is forged in the fire of survival, tempered by the gentleness of care. And in this quiet realization, I understood that their absence, even now, was irrelevant. The memory of my younger sister surged in with a painful clarity, like waves crashing relentlessly against the cliffs outside. Richard's confession had ripped open a wound I didn't know was still raw. The knowledge of her sickness, and the cruel secrecy of my mother's obsession with appearances twisting through me like a storm. I closed my eyes, letting the grief flow freely, acknowledging the sister I had never held, the life that had been stolen by pride and fear. And yet, I allowed it to transform into something else, determination. I would honor her existence by living fully, by embracing every moment without hesitation, by loving those who deserved it rather than clinging to those who never had. For too long, my life had been defined by their choices, their absences, their cruelty. Today, it would be defined by me. I walked to the grand staircase, my fingers grazing the polished railing, grounding myself in the tactile reality of the home I had built. Each step echoed beneath me, a steady drumbeat of autonomy, a reminder that this was my sanctuary, my rules, my space of creation. I thought of all the nights I had imagined confronting them, of the fantasies where I shouted, I struck, I made them feel the weight of their betrayal. But none of that was necessary. Power did not come from revenge. It came from recognition of one's own worth, and the refusal to allow toxic influences entry into the sanctity of your life. Margaret's sneer, Richard's shame, their manipulations, they had no more claim on me. I exhaled, a long, deliberate breath, releasing the final threads of tension, and for the first time in decades, I felt unshackled. The ocean's roar filled the silence as I returned to the front door. Sunlight spilled across the polished wood, illuminating the threshold that had once been a portal to pain and rejection. I ran my hand over the brass doorknob, imagining it as a symbol of choice. Every turn, every click a decision to embrace my life fully. I opened the door briefly, peering out at the driveway where their car had disappeared, swallowed by the horizon. No pleading, no explanations, no further justifications. They were gone, and in their absence, a space had been created, not of emptiness, but of possibility. Possibility to love freely, to trust again, to live without fear of emotional manipulation. For the first time, I realized that closure wasn't given. It was claimed, and I had claimed it, fiercely, irrevocably, triumphantly. I stepped back into the living room, letting the door swing gently closed behind me. The sound resonated like a final punctuation mark, echoing in the walls, reverberating in my chest. I walked to the balcony, the sunlight warm on my skin, and breathed in the sea salt air, letting it fill every corner of my being. In the distance, sailboats drifted lazily across the horizon, untethered and free. I let the image wash over me, knowing that my life, too, was untethered. Clara's spirit seemed to hover beside me, whispering that I had done what she always knew I could, that I had survived, thrived, and claimed the love and respect that had been denied to me for so long. The past no longer dictated my emotions, my choices, my destiny. I was no longer a child in need of validation. I was Audrey, whole and untouchable. Night fell over the seaside house, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, a tranquil contrast to the chaos of the day. I poured a glass of wine and settled onto the balcony chair, feeling the breeze on my face and the warmth of the setting sun in my chest. I thought of all the nights I had feared abandonment, all the moments I had doubted my worth, and now, every tear, every scar, every heartbreak had become a testament to my endurance. I smiled softly, acknowledging the journey, and whispered into the wind, "I am free." There was no anger, no lingering resentment, only peace, strength, and an unshakable sense of self. Finally, I turned back toward the house, its walls filled with light, with the echoes of love and laughter I had chosen to cultivate. And I knew, without question, that I had crossed the final door. I had left behind the shadows of my parents' toxicity, the ghosts of rejection, and the hidden tragedies that had once haunted me. The future stretched ahead, uncharted and bright, ready for the life I would live on my terms. And as the door clicked shut, sealing the past behind me, I whispered to the empty air, "This is my family now. This is my life." The waves below whispered back, a soft, eternal applause for the woman who had finally claimed her freedom.